diversify our products, that build new markets and create those hundreds of thousands of high-paying careers for our workers from the trades to technology. Tomorrow, we'll announce the first tranche, the first batch of these projects. Projects that will increase Canada's independence, boost our economy, align with the interests of Indigenous peoples, and advance our climate goals. Canada's new government recognizes that addressing climate change isn't just a moral duty that we have to our kids and grandkids. It is that moral duty. But it's also an economic imperative for the competitiveness of our businesses and the workers they employ. And so to those ends, this fall, we will release a new climate competitiveness strategy that focuses on results over objectives and investments over prohibitions.
Hello, everybody. Today is Tuesday, January 6th. Happy Christmas Eve to any Christian Orthodox viewers of mine. I just want to kick this off saying how big of a loser BlackRock Mark Carney is. How the hell can you be climate competitive in a world that does not give a shit about it? The U.S. just took out Nicolas Maduro, yanked him out of Caracas, taking over Venezuelan oil production. They're not going to give a shit about climate competitiveness, and you're making a fucking national strategy around climate competitiveness when no one cares. Quite literally, nobody cares. None of the major oil manufacturers in the world care about climate competitiveness. Not the Russians, not the Saudis, not the Emiratis, not the Iranians. Venezuela doesn't give a shit. The US also doesn't care anymore, at least. And you're telling me that the big strategy that Canada's coming up with is climate competitiveness? Jesus Christ. We're in for some shit, guys. And I wanted to touch on this because, they did this great article on what the attack on the U.S. On Venezuela, could mean for oil and Canadian crude exports. And so Venezuela's back in play, guys. And how is Canada's energy sector exposed? It is exposed, guys. So the U.S. operation in Venezuela wasn't just political, guys. It was economic. And for Canada, it cuts straight into the heart of our only remaining global advantage, energy. So with Nicolas Maduro removed and Washington openly signaling control over Venezuela's oil sector, the Western Hemisphere's crude markets, guys, this whole thing just changed overnight. The uncomfortable truth here is Canada is about to face actual competition again. And Ottawa has literally done nothing to prepare for it. What we're doing to prepare for it is we're coming up with a climate competitiveness act that's going to be coming out in the fall. That's the big thing. We're going to be climate competitive. Who cares? Who cares? It says the United States and its oil industry will take over control of Venezuela's diminished energy sector after U.S. forces attacked the South American OPEC member and captured its leader and his wife, President Donald Trump said. Given the industry's state of disrepair, it could take several years for Venezuelan oil production to recover to meaningful volumes. U.S. oil majors have so far been silent on any plans to rebuild Venezuela's oil industry. Nonetheless, the toppling of socialist leader Nicolas Maduro threatens to transform the hemisphere's crude oil markets, possibly weakening prices on the prospect of Venezuela's heavy oil production returning to feed American refineries that would put it in competition with the Canadian output that dominates U.S. imports. Mr. Trump said on Saturday that Venezuela, which has the world's largest oil reserves, stole U.S. assets almost 2 decades ago after American oil companies developed fields in the country. And post-attack, they will now return to revive the industry. This is interesting here. So I want to touch on this part. So it says the U.S. assault on the founding member of the of OPEC coincides with an era of low oil prices and forecasts for more of the same. The prospect of resumption of Venezuelan supplies in global markets after years of U.S. pardon me, guys. After years of U.S. sanctions could add to the weakness, said Phil Flynn, energy market analyst at the Prices Futures Group in Chicago. Members of OPEC Plus, which includes Russia and Kazakhstan, said on Sunday they were committed to stability in oil markets without mentioning the developments in Venezuela. I think this is a very interesting point. It's interesting that the Russians aren't saying anything about this and that they're being very hands-off with this. And there's a lot of speculation as to why this could be. I'm sure that the Russians knew well in advance that something like this was going on. This might have even been a part of some of the talks that happened in Alaska. Russia's been a known supporter of the Maduro regime, also of Hugo Chavez back in the day. And so it could be very likely that a bit of a handshake agreement was created here between Trump and Putin. But it says in 2025, crude suffered its worst annual loss since 2020, falling 20% against the backdrop of surplus supplies and uncertain global economic conditions. U.S. benchmark oil closed down 10 cents on Friday at $57 a barrel. This part here is very interesting. So there's definitely going to be more competition for heavy oil, and Canada and Russia are going to see the same over time, Mr. Flynn said. I think, though, it'll be a net positive for the, obviously, U.S. economy. Venezuela currently produces about 1 million barrels a day, a third of its output at the beginning of the century. So it's producing around 3 million barrels a day in the early 2000s. In 2013, the U.S. imported about 1 million barrels of Venezuelan crude a day. That's led to a trickle in months of zero shipments after the U.S. imposed sanctions in 2019. In that time, China became Venezuela's top customer. So this is interesting. So when Trump came, before he left office, he put these massive sanctions on Venezuela, and those shipments stopped, and these guys rerouted to China. It's interesting to see what kind of pressure this is actually going to place on China. China's been actually diversifying quite a bit with oil. They're buying oil up, obviously, from the Russians. They made a big pipeline with the Russians, but they've also been buying a lot of Iranian oil as well. But this is interesting. So this is where we started getting into the Canadian context. By contrast, Canada shipped 2.7 million barrels a day to the United States, largely to refineries in the Midwest in 2013, increasing to a peak of nearly 4.4 million barrels in mid-2024. Last year, exports to the U.S. fell back to below 4 million a day as more oil was shipped to Asia via the newly expanded Trans Mountain Pipeline to the Pacific Coast. The startup of that expansion, which nearly tripled capacity to 890,000 barrels a day, has contributed to a sharp decrease in the price discount Canadian oil had suffered previously. So just so you guys know, and I don't know if it gets into it here, but what happened was why Trump is saying that Venezuela stole U.S. Oil is because Hugo Chavez, back in the day, quite literally repatriated. He basically seized the U.S. oil refineries that existed in Venezuela, right? He literally did that. He literally seized the oil refineries, and so that's why he's saying they stole our oil, right? Technically it is theft, but under what conditions did that happen and all of that? I guess all of these things are kind of up for debate, right? But really, what the U.S. is really doing here, right, is the United States is not interested in symbolism, guys. It's interested in supply control. Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves in the world. It's mostly heavy crude, but it fits perfectly into the US's Gulf Coast and Midwest refineries. The US has they've become specialists in refining heavy oil because they've been doing with Canadian oil as well as Venezuelan until Hugo Chavez seized it. And so for years, these sanctions kept Venezuelan oil off market. Now Donald Trump is openly saying American oil companies are going to rebuild Venezuelan infrastructure, extract the oil, and sell it globally. It's not a small thing, guys. And the way I see it, this means three things. It means more supply globally. There's going to be downward pressure on prices and direct competition with Canadian heavy crude. How is Canada in the crosshairs here? Canada and Venezuela, we produce the same type of oil. Heavy crude is not interchangeable with light shale oil. Refinery, you literally have to build structural refineries for it. In the US, refineries have spent decades optimizing for Canadian supply. So they have the know-how, they have the technology to refine this, guys. And Canada, as we saw in the article, is currently shipping close to 4 million barrels a day to the US. And that dominance exists for one reason only, and it's because Venezuelan oil was offline. If Venezuelan oil supply returns, even gradually over years, 500,000 barrels to a million to 1.5 million to whatever, competition will show up first in the U.S. Gulf Coast, right? Houston, Texas, that area. Because it's also close to ship, right? If you guys actually look at a map, actually I might even open it. So we got Venezuela here. Look, and it's you're literally just shipping it. You're shipping oil from here right up here, right? You could probably even build a fucking pipeline, honestly, underwater pipeline connecting directly into the U.S. if you really wanted to. Would not surprise me if you're able to do that. So this is what's going on, right? This is the shipping lane that's going to happen, right? And I mean, what we should have done is we should have had that Keystone Pipeline build going from Alberta down into Texas. This issue probably would not have happened in the capacity that it did. But now we're dealing with what we're dealing with, right? Venezuela directly, Caribbean Sea, Gulf of America directly into Texas. This is where Canadian producers are really going to start losing the most in pricing power, right? So Canadian industry is going to have to start finding new markets. We're going to start having to refine. We're going to have to be creative with our own oil, with our own commodity, right? This is what's interesting is this is happening in a weak oil market right now, right? Oil prices already fell 20% last year, right? We're hovering in that $50 range, and there's more supply into a soft market means lower prices for longer, right? So Canada's really, we're taking a hit. We're taking a lot of L's here, you know? And even if Venezuelan production takes years to rebuild, markets, they price expectations early, right? That's why there's futures. The pressure is going to immediately come into the futures market, into investment decisions, in capital spending. Investors are going to look into this long term, right? You're going to see money flows going into Chevron, Exxon, all these major oil companies, because over the long term, they're going to rebuild Venezuelan oil infrastructure and they're going to basically own it. And Canada's producers don't just lose barrels, right? They lose netbacks. We're losing margins. We're losing leverage, right? And so whoever said that, you know, Canada or the US can't live without Canada, sorry to say, guys, we're losing that leverage that we think we have. We're losing it quite a bit. And so pipeline saved us once, but it's not a lasting solution here. Canada's one recent win was infrastructure, right? We built that, or we expanded the Trans Mountain Pipeline that finally gave Canadian crude access to Asia, reducing dependence on U.S. buyers and narrowing those price discounts, right? But the real problem here is that that pipeline is already largely spoken for, right? We have buyers for it. What happens if we have to displace 1 million barrels of U.S. imports from Canada? We have to all of a sudden find a new buyer for 1 million barrels. How are we going to do that? Who are we going to sell to? If Canadian crude gets displaced in the U.S. Gulf Coast, guys, producers are going to face like two serious bad options. Rerouting barrels west at higher transport costs, right? And re-export through U.S. ports, adding tolls and friction. We don't have the infrastructure to reroute. We don't. It's both of these scenarios just mean lower prices, lower realized prices. Sorry for Canadians, so lower margins, right? And how is this helping the U.S. and hurting Canada? From Washington's perspective, this is awesome. It's a logical move, right? There's more heavy oil supply. We're going to weaken Russia, pressure OPEC, lower domestic fuel costs. We're cutting China even more out of South America, right? So we pulled Argentina out of China's sphere of influence. Argentina was about to become a BRICS nation. We pulled it out with, or the U.S. did, with Milei. Venezuela's folding now as well. So there's a lot of geopolitical play going on here, right? But this is essentially strengthening U.S. energy dominance. And from Ottawa's perspective, this exposes a massive failure, guys. This is catastrophic. And the worst thing is, man, Canada had decades to expand pipeline access, to secure long-term Asian contracts, even maybe European contracts, right? Treat energy as a strategic resource and lock in market share. Instead, all we've ever done was we've debated ourselves into fucking paralysis. And the OPEC nations are watching carefully. They have to be. More Venezuelan supply is going to undermine the cartel's discipline, and it's going to put pressure on producers like Russia. And that's, the U.S. doesn't care. Washington doesn't. They don't care. Canada, however, we're not inside OPEC, right? So we're not protected by cartel coordination, and we're not nimble enough to respond quickly. So we end up becoming price takers in a market that is becoming more competitive by design. So we're screwed, guys. We're screwed. And this isn't about, cheering on regime change, right? This is realism. Energy is power, literally and metaphorically. Countries that control the supply chains control the outcomes as well. The U.S. is reasserting control over hemispheric energy flows. Canada is reacting. We're not leading, and we're reacting rhetorically, right? We're literally not doing anything. What we're doing is, as you heard BlackRock, Mark Carney, we're going to be climate competitive. We're going to be climate competitive. Fuck yeah. I'm so excited. So a serious country treats its natural resources as leverage. It's not a liability to be apologized for. And how this is going to translate for Canadians, we're going to have lower government revenues, weaker investment in the oil patch, fewer high-paying jobs, reduced fiscal flexibility, and once again, Canadians are going to be asked to absorb the consequences of these decisions, right? Personally, I also think this is just going to give Alberta even more reason to push for that independence movement that they've started. Because why would they want to be a part of a Canada that is not protecting a strategic resource that they have? The best thing to do would be to say, we're done with this, guys, and if they could join the U.S., then Canada would truly be screwed. And is Canada doing anything about this right now? We're not. We're being climate competitive. There's no emergency energy strategy. There's no plan to secure long-term buyers. There's no urgency around approvals. No acknowledgement that competition is returning. And Canada is hoping its geography is going to save it again. But hope, guys, isn't policy. To wrap it all up, guys, Venezuela is coming back online. This isn't a shock. It's really a warning, specifically for Canada, The world is reorganizing around energy security, and Canada is still arguing about whether it should participate or not. If Canadian oil loses market share, guys, it won't be because Trump or Venezuela or OPEC. We're gonna blame them because that's what we've been doing. That's what the Liberals have been doing. That's what the NDP has been doing. But it's gonna quite literally be because Canada chose hesitation while others are choosing strategy. All we do is talk nonsense in the House of Commons. All we do is argue. We never come up with actual solutions to anything. That's all I have for you guys today. Please like, share, and subscribe. Leave me some comments in the comment sections below. What do you guys think about this this emerging situation? I'd love to hear from you. Stay informed, stay curious, and God bless Canada.
This is Canada. Maple